3 words changed everything I believed about consciousness and death. 3 words spoken by a man who should have been completely unconscious, brain exposed, under the deepest anesthesia we could safely administer. My name is Rachel Martinez. Last month, during what should have been a routine neurosurgery, my patient looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Help me confess." The problem? He was speaking a language that died 1,500 years ago. A language he'd never heard, never studied, never encountered in his entire life. John Morrison was a construction worker from Detroit. High school dropout, never traveled outside Michigan, never showed interest in history or foreign cultures. Yet for 3 months, every time we put him under anesthesia, he became someone else entirely. Someone with blood on his hands and a secret that had been buried for over a millennium. What I discovered about John's impossible transformations led me to uncover a murder that happened before America was even discovered. It led me to realize that our hospital was built on top of something that should have been left undisturbed. And it taught me that some guilt is so powerful, it can reach across centuries to find the one person who might be able to help. This is the story of how a routine brain surgery became a confession booth for the dead. And how I learned that sometimes, healing the living means helping the dead find peace. But I need to warn you, what I'm about to tell you will change how you think about hospitals forever. Before I tell you about the impossible things that happened in Operating Room 3, you need to understand who I am and why my word matters. I'm Rachel Martinez, a surgical nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital in Chicago. I've been working in neurosurgery for 8 years. I've assisted in over 2,000 brain surgeries, from routine tumor removals to complex trauma cases that push the boundaries of medical science. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or supernatural explanations. My background is in medical technology and neurological monitoring. I believe in what I can measure, document, and verify through scientific methods. When a patient is under general anesthesia, they are unconscious. Period. Their brain activity follows predictable patterns. They don't speak, they don't respond to stimuli, they don't have coherent thoughts. This isn't opinion, it's medical fact based on decades of research. St. Catherine's Hospital has been saving lives for 67 years. We're a Level 1 trauma center with one of the most advanced neurosurgical programs in the Midwest. When someone suffers a catastrophic brain injury in 3 states, they often end up in our operating rooms. I work primarily with Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the country's leading neurosurgeons. In our time together, we've performed procedures that other hospitals won't attempt. We've saved patients who arrived with injuries that should have been fatal. But nothing in my 8 years of experience prepared me for what happened when John Morrison arrived in our trauma bay. John came to us after a 3-story fall from a construction scaffold. Massive head trauma, multiple brain bleeds, the kind of injuries that often result in death or permanent disability. What made John's case extraordinary wasn't his injuries. We see traumatic brain injuries every week. What made it extraordinary was what happened every time we put him to sleep. Because when John Morrison went under anesthesia, someone else woke up. Someone who had been dead for 1,500 years. Someone who desperately needed to tell the truth about a crime that had haunted him across centuries. And somehow, I became the only person who could help him do it. September 15th, 2023, 11:32 a.m. The call came in as a Level 1 trauma. Construction worker, 3-story fall, massive head trauma, ETA 6 minutes. When the paramedics brought John Morrison through our doors, I could see immediately that we were dealing with something serious. He was unconscious, his vital signs were erratic, and the CT scan showed dangerous swelling in multiple areas of his brain. John Morrison was 34 years old, married, father of 2 young daughters. According to his wife Sarah, who arrived 20 minutes after he did, John was careful, methodical, never took unnecessary risks. He's worked construction for 12 years without a single accident, Sarah told me while we prepped him for surgery. I don't understand how this happened. He's always so cautious. The accident report didn't provide any answers either. John had been working on properly secured scaffolding that had been inspected that morning. His safety equipment was intact. There was no obvious explanation for the fall. But in trauma surgery, we focus on saving lives, not investigating causes. Dr. Vasquez took one look at John's scans and made the call. Emergency craniotomy to relieve the pressure and repair damaged blood vessels. We had maybe an hour before the swelling became fatal. The surgery began at 1:47 p.m. Standard neurosurgical team, Dr. Vasquez, myself, 2 other surgical nurses, and Dr. Patricia Kim handling anesthesia. John was placed under general anesthesia using our standard protocol. Within minutes, he was completely unconscious, his brain activity showing normal patterns for deep anesthesia. For the first 30 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Dr. Vasquez opened the skull, identified the sources of bleeding, and began repairing damaged blood vessels. John's vital signs were stable, his anesthesia levels were perfect. Then, at exactly 2:17 p.m., John Morrison began to speak. Not confused mumbling, not the random sounds that sometimes occur during surgical procedures. Clear, coherent, fluent speech in what sounded like a foreign language. I have sinned, I have killed, I have blood on my hands. But he wasn't speaking English. He was speaking in what sounded like an ancient dialect, with grammar and pronunciation unlike anything I'd ever heard. Dr. Kim immediately checked his anesthesia levels. "He's deep under," she said, adjusting her monitors. "There's no way he should be conscious, let alone talking." But John continued speaking, his voice clear and strong despite the fact that his brain was literally open and being operated on. "I did not tell the truth. I killed for gold, and now I cannot sleep." Again, not in English, but somehow I understood what he was saying. It was like the meaning was being translated directly into my mind. Dr. Vasquez paused her work. In 8 years of assisting her, I'd never seen her look confused during surgery. Could this be some kind of neurological response to the trauma? She asked Dr. Kim. Some language center being stimulated by the injury? It's possible, Dr. Kim replied, but he should still be unconscious. And this sounds like he's having a conversation, not random neurological firing. I was monitoring John's brain activity, and what I saw didn't make medical sense. The areas associated with speech and language were active, but not in patterns we'd expect for conscious speech. It was like information was coming from somewhere else and being processed through his language centers. John continued speaking for 15 minutes. Sometimes his voice was urgent, sometimes pleading, sometimes filled with genuine anguish. But it was all in this unknown language, and somehow I could understand every word. Forgive me. Forgive me. I do not know how to find peace. At 2:32 p.m., as suddenly as it had started, the speech stopped. John's brain activity returned to normal anesthesia patterns, and Dr. Vasquez completed the surgery successfully. The procedure saved John's life. We'd stopped the bleeding, reduced the swelling, and given his brain the best chance to heal. But as we transferred him to the ICU, I couldn't stop thinking about those 15 minutes of impossible speech. Not just the fact that he'd spoken under deep anesthesia, but what he'd said. Because somehow a construction worker from Detroit had been confessing to murder in a language I'd never heard but could somehow understand. During my break, I wrote down everything I could remember. I have sinned, I have killed, I have blood on my hands. I did not tell the truth, I killed for gold, and now I cannot sleep. Forgive me, I do not know how to find peace. I showed my notes to Dr. Vasquez after surgery. She was as puzzled as I was. In 30 years of neurosurgery, she said, I've never seen anything like this. Patients don't speak under general anesthesia, and if they did, they'd speak their native language, not whatever this was. Dr. Kim was equally baffled. His anesthesia levels were perfect throughout. He was definitely unconscious, but somehow something was speaking through him. That phrase stuck with me. Something was speaking through him. Because that's exactly what it felt like. Not like John Morrison was talking, but like someone else was using his voice. Over the next few days, as John recovered in the ICU, I researched unusual neurological responses to brain trauma. I read about foreign accent syndrome, about rare conditions where injuries cause people to speak differently. But I couldn't find anything that matched what we'd witnessed. John Morrison had no exposure to foreign languages. According to his wife, he'd grown up in a monolingual household in Detroit, never traveled internationally, never studied other cultures. Yet for 15 minutes during brain surgery, he'd spoken fluently in an ancient language, confessing to crimes he'd never committed. I was still trying to understand this mystery when complications from John's surgery required him to return to the operating room 2 weeks later. And that's when I learned that our first encounter with the impossible was just the beginning. October 2nd, 2023. John Morrison returned to our surgical suite with complications that worried everyone on our team. Despite a successful initial surgery, he'd developed a chronic subdural hematoma, a slow bleed creating dangerous pressure in his brain. John would need another craniotomy to drain the blood and repair the ongoing bleeding. His wife Sarah was understandably anxious. "The first surgery went so well," Sarah told me as we prepped John. "But he's been having these strange dreams, really vivid dreams about places he's never been, people he's never met. Sometimes when he wakes up, he doesn't remember where he is." I'd been thinking about John's case constantly since his first surgery. The unexplained speech under anesthesia haunted me. I'd even contacted a linguistics professor at Northwestern University, hoping he might identify the language John had spoken. Dr. Samuel Cohen's response had been disturbing. According to him, the phrases I'd transcribed appeared to be ancient Aramaic, a dialect that died out over 1,000 years ago. But more disturbing were his translations. "I have sinned, I have killed, I have blood on my hands. I did not tell the truth. I killed for gold. And now I cannot sleep. Forgive me. Forgive me. I do not know how to find peace." A construction worker from Detroit had been confessing to murder in a language that predated the founding of America. I'd shared this with Dr. Vasquez, who was as stunned as I was. We agreed to pay special attention during John's second surgery and to document anything unusual. This time, I came prepared. I had recording equipment, additional monitoring devices, and a plan to document everything thoroughly. The second surgery began at 2:15 p.m. Same team, Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Kim, myself, and 2 other nurses. John was placed under the same anesthesia protocol. For 20 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Dr. Vasquez located the bleeding source and began draining the hematoma. John's vital signs were stable. Then at 2:37 p.m., it started again. "My name is Aram Ben David. I was a merchant in the city of Antioch." Again, not in English, but somehow I understood every word. This time, I was ready. I started recording and taking detailed notes. "I am an evil man. I killed my friend for the gold he carried." Dr. Kim checked his anesthesia levels. Perfect. John was deeply unconscious, yet speaking clearly and coherently. This was in the 35th year of Justinian's reign. Plague was spreading through the city. Dr. Vasquez continued her work while listening to this impossible conversation. "This is definitely the same phenomenon as before, but he's providing more detail." For 30 minutes, John continued speaking as someone named Aram Ben David. Unlike the first surgery's emotional confessions, this time he told a detailed story. "His name was Matthias. He was my friend since childhood. He carried much gold from Constantinople. I discovered they did not know the way to the village, so I told them I would guide them. But I betrayed them. In the night, I killed Matthias and took his gold, then I hid his body in the desert." What struck me most was the consistency. This wasn't John Morrison's voice or speaking patterns. The cadence, the emotional emphasis, even the pronunciation. It was like listening to a completely different person using John's vocal cords. The story continued with precise geographical details. "The grave lies beneath the great rock, north of the river, near where the old temple of Apollo once stood. The gold is hidden in blue cloth, buried with his body. No one knew the truth. I told them Matthias died of plague." Then, as suddenly as it began, the speech stopped. John's brain activity returned to normal, and Dr. Vasquez completed the surgery successfully. After John was stable in recovery, I immediately researched everything I could about the names and places he'd mentioned. What I found sent chills down my spine. Aram Ben David was a real person, a merchant from Antioch who lived during the reign of Emperor Justinian the Furious in the 6th century. Historical records mentioned his disappearance around 540 CE, shortly after the death of his business partner, Matthias of Cappadocia. The geographical details matched known landmarks from that period. The historical context was accurate down to specific dates and political situations. John Morrison, a construction worker who'd never studied history, was somehow accessing detailed historical information about real people who lived 1,500 years ago. But I was about to discover that this impossible phenomenon had a connection much closer to home than ancient Antioch. The connection was literally beneath our feet. After John's second surgery, I couldn't let this mystery go. I had a patient channeling a real historical figure, speaking a dead language, providing accurate details about events from 15 centuries ago. Either I was witnessing something impossible, or there was an explanation that would revolutionize our understanding of consciousness. I spent every free moment researching, not just the historical figures John mentioned, but the history of our hospital itself. Something about this situation felt connected to our location, our building, our very foundation. The breakthrough came when I decided to research the construction of St. Catherine's Hospital more thoroughly. The official records mentioned a 1963 archaeological discovery during construction, but I wanted details. I contacted Dr. Margaret Stevens, a retired archaeologist who had worked on the 1963 excavation. At 87, she was still sharp and had vivid memories of the project. That was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in Illinois history, she told me over coffee. We found evidence of continuous habitation dating back over 2,000 years. My heart started racing when she continued. Surprisingly, we found a small community of Middle Eastern traders who had established a settlement here in the 6th century. Middle Eastern traders in the 6th century? Oh yes. A group of Byzantine merchants had established a trading post around 540 CE. They traded with local Native American tribes, exchanging Mediterranean goods for furs and regional products. What happened to this community? That's the mystery, Dr. Race, Stevens said, her eyes lighting up. The settlement was abandoned suddenly in the early 540s. We found signs of hasty departure, valuable items left behind, food stores abandoned, personal belongings scattered as if people had fled quickly. Were there burial sites connected to this settlement? Several, and some showed signs of violence, trauma to skulls, evidence of stab wounds. It looked like some of these people had been murdered. I felt a chill. Dr. Stevens, did you ever encounter the name Aram ben David in your research? Her reaction was immediate. How do you know that name? It's complicated, but please tell me what you know. Aram ben David was mentioned in several documents we found. He was a prominent merchant in the community, but he disappeared around the time the settlement was abandoned. There were indications his disappearance was connected to the death of another merchant named Matthias. I could barely breathe. What kind of indications? We found what appeared to be a formal accusation document written in Aramaic. It accused Aram of murdering Matthias during a trading expedition and stealing his goods. But we never found physical evidence. No bodies, no stolen goods. Dr. Stevens, when the hospital was built, were all the remains from this area properly relocated? She was quiet for a long moment. Officially, yes. But there were complications. Some burial sites were directly under where the foundation needed to be poured. The construction timeline was tight, and there was pressure to complete the project on schedule. What are you saying? Some of the deeper burial sites, particularly those in what is now the basement level, were incorporated into the foundation rather than excavated. The decision was made that disturbing them would compromise the building's structural integrity. I felt the pieces clicking together. So, there are still human remains under the hospital? It's quite possible. And if what you're suggesting is true, if these remains are connected to your patient's experiences, then you might be dealing with unfinished business. Dr. Stevens pulled out a folder she'd kept for 60 years. I have copies of all the documents from that excavation, including the accusation against Aram ben David. The document fragment she showed me was in Aramaic script. Her translation read, "Let it be known that Aram ben David, son of Simon, merchant of Antioch, stands accused of the murder of Matthias of Cappadocia. Witnesses attest that Aram guided Matthias into the desert lands north of the river. Matthias was found dead, his goods missing, his body bearing knife wounds. Aram claims Matthias died of plague, but the wounds tell otherwise. Let God's judgment fall upon the guilty." I compared this to what John had said under anesthesia. The details matched perfectly. The location, the method of murder, even the false claim about plague. Dr. Stevens, hypothetically, if someone's remains were never properly laid to rest, if they died with unresolved guilt, could their spirit somehow communicate with the living? She studied me carefully. You're asking if I believe in ghosts. I'm asking if you think the dead can have unfinished business. In 60 years of archaeological work, I've encountered things that can't be explained by science alone. Sites where unexplained phenomena occurred until proper respects were paid. What would someone like Aram need to find peace? Confession, probably. Acknowledgement of his crimes. Maybe reparation, making right what he made wrong. I left that meeting with a theory that would have sounded insane weeks earlier. Aram Ben David was using John Morrison's unconscious mind to confess crimes he'd carried for 15 centuries. But I still didn't understand why John specifically was being used as this vessel. That answer came when I researched John's background more thoroughly. What I discovered about John Morrison's family history would explain everything and lead to the most dramatic surgery of my career. Because John Morrison wasn't just a random patient who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was chosen for this role by forces that stretched back 1,500 years. Investigating John Morrison's family background revealed the final piece of this impossible puzzle. During our pre-surgical consultations, John's wife Sarah had mentioned that he was adopted. With John's permission, I accessed basic information about his biological family. What I found made everything click into place. John Morrison's birth name was John Matthias Davidson, Matthias, the same name as Aram Ben David's murdered friend. The connections went deeper. John's biological family had emigrated to America in the 1920s from a region that had been part of the Ottoman Empire, specifically from an area near modern-day Antakya, Turkey. Antakya is the modern name for ancient Antioch. John Morrison was a direct descendant of Matthias of Cappadocia, the man Aram Ben David had murdered 1,500 years ago. When I shared this discovery with Dr. Cohen, the linguistics professor, his response was immediate and excited. He asked me to meet him at Northwestern University, saying he had important information to show me. Dr. Cohen's office was filled with ancient texts and historical documents. He led me to a table where he'd spread out several photographs and translations. After our correspondence about your patient, he said, I became fascinated by this case. I've been in contact with colleagues in Turkey and Syria, and we've made remarkable discoveries. He showed me a photograph of an ancient stone inscription. This was discovered last year near Antakya, ancient Antioch. It's a memorial for a merchant named Matthias of Cappadocia, who died in 541 CE. The translation read, Here lies Matthias, son of David, faithful merchant and friend, taken from us in the desert by treachery and greed. His blood cries out for justice. But here's the most interesting part, Dr. Cohen continued, showing me another document. This is a letter from a Byzantine church official, dated 542 CE. It describes the investigation into Matthias's death and the search for Aram Ben David. He read the translation. The merchant Aram Ben David has vanished like smoke. The gold he stole from righteous Matthias remains hidden with the dead man's bones. Until the truth is told and stolen goods returned, the soul of Aram will know no peace, and the soul of Matthias will cry out for justice. I felt like I was standing at the intersection of ancient history and modern medicine. Dr. Cohen, are you saying this situation is connected to a 1,500-year-old crime? According to these historical documents, both Aram Ben David and Matthias of Cappadocia died with unresolved business. One carried guilt, the other sought justice. In many ancient cultures, bloodline connections were believed to create spiritual links across generations. Dr. Cohen showed me one more document, a Byzantine ritual for releasing souls trapped by guilt and vengeance. If your patient is serving as a conduit between these ancient souls and the modern world, there might be a way to help them find peace, but it would require one more surgery. What do you mean? According to this ritual, Aram would need to make a complete confession in the presence of Matthias's descendant, your patient John. The confession would need to be witnessed and recorded, and ideally, any stolen goods would need to be acknowledged or returned. But John is unconscious during surgery. How would he witness anything? In documented cases of spiritual channeling, The host often retains awareness of what occurs during the experience, even if they're not traditionally conscious. John might be aware of Aram's confessions on some level. I returned to the hospital with more questions than answers, but also with a plan. If Dr. Cohen was right, John's upcoming third surgery could facilitate a complete confession and resolution for these ancient souls. But first, I needed to convince Dr. Vasquez to allow what would essentially be a spiritual intervention in our operating room. To my surprise, Dr. Vasquez was more open than I'd expected. "Rachel," she said after I'd presented my research, "in 30 years of neurosurgery, I've learned there are aspects of consciousness we don't fully understand. If there's a chance this intervention could help John's recovery without compromising medical safety, I'm willing to try." John's third surgery was scheduled for November 15th. This time we would be prepared not just for a medical procedure, but for what Dr. Cohen had called a resolution across centuries. I also spoke with John directly about what we'd discovered. His reaction surprised me. "It explains so much," he said thoughtfully. "I've been having these dreams since the accident. Dreams about being someone else, this merchant named Aram. I dream about betraying my friend, about being consumed by greed. In the dreams, I feel his guilt as if it were my own. How do you feel about possibly helping him find peace? If I can help someone, even someone who's been dead for 1,500 years, find forgiveness and rest, then I want to do it. Maybe that's why this is happening to me." What happened in that operating room would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the connections that bind us across time. Because some debts are so profound, they transcend death itself. November 15th, 2023. John Morrison's third surgery was unlike anything in my medical career. While Dr. Vasquez would remove scar tissue causing John ongoing symptoms, I prepared for what might be the resolution of a 1,500-year-old spiritual crisis. Dr. A. Cohen joined us as an observer, bringing historical documents and expertise in ancient ritual practices. John's wife Sarah waited in the family consultation room, briefed on our theory about her husband's impossible connection to ancient events. The most unusual addition was Father Michael Kowalski, a Catholic priest who specialized in what the church termed unusual spiritual phenomena. Dr. Cohen had suggested having religious authority present might help facilitate resolution. "I've seen cases like this before," Father Kowalski told me during our pre-surgical meeting. "Not often, but they occur. When someone dies with tremendous guilt, especially involving violence, their soul can become anchored to the earthly plane. They seek confession, absolution, a way to make amends." John himself was remarkably calm. "I feel like I've been preparing for this my whole life," he told me the night before surgery. "Like everything that's happened has led to this moment." The surgery began at 2 p.m. Same anesthesia protocol, same monitoring, but this time I had additional recording devices and Dr. Cohen standing by with translations. For the first hour, surgery proceeded normally. Dr. Vasquez carefully removed scar tissue while I monitored John's brain activity for unusual patterns. At 3:07 p.m., it began. "I am Aram Ben David. I have come to tell the truth." Dr. Cohen began real-time translation, though somehow I could understand every word as John spoke. This time, instead of fragmented confessions, Aram's voice was organized, deliberate, as if he'd been preparing for this moment. "Matthias was my dearest friend. We grew up together in Antioch. He was a good man, and I was consumed by greed." Father Kowalski stepped closer to the operating table. "Aram, we are here to listen. Tell us what happened." The response came immediately, as if Aram could hear the priest. "In the 35th year of Justinian's reign, I was asked to guide Matthias and his men to a northern village for fur trading. He carried much gold, coins, and jewels from Constantinople." Dr. Vasquez continued her surgical work while this impossible conversation unfolded. "We left the city in the morning, but in my heart evil was waiting. I saw the wealth he carried and thought about what I could do with such riches." Father Kowalski spoke again. "What did you do, Aram?" The answer came with deep anguish. "On the second night, while Matthias slept, I took my sword and killed him. He did not expect betrayal from his childhood friend. He looked at me with wounded eyes and asked, 'Why, my friend?' And he died with a broken heart." The operating room was silent except for medical equipment and Aram's confession. I took his gold and hid his body under a large rock north of the river. I told his men he died of plague. I returned to Antioch as a rich man, but my heart was dead. Father Kowalski asked, "What happened to you after that, Aram?" I could not sleep. I could not eat. Every night, Matthias came to me in dreams, asking, "Where is my gold? Where is my body?" After 2 months, I died from sorrow and fear, but my soul found no rest. Dr. Cohen had been taking detailed notes. Now he looked up at Father Kowalski and nodded. Father Kowalski addressed the spirit directly. "Aram ben David, your confession has been heard and witnessed. But tell us, where are Matthias's remains and the gold you stole?" "Under this place. Under this building you built above our burial ground. The rock is still here in the basement beneath the ground. And with it, Matthias's body and his gold wrapped in blue cloth." Father Kowalski made the sign of the cross. "Aram ben David, in the name of divine mercy, I offer you the forgiveness you have sought for 15 centuries. Your confession has been heard. Your guilt is acknowledged. Go in peace, and may Matthias's soul also find rest." What happened next was unlike anything I'd witnessed in a medical setting. John's body relaxed completely on the operating table. His brain activity, which had shown strange patterns during his episodes of ancient speech, suddenly normalized. Then, in a voice that was clearly John Morrison, not Aram ben David, he spoke. "I see him," John said, eyes still closed under anesthesia. "I see Matthias. He's not angry anymore. He's sad but not angry. He says he forgives his friend. He says 1,500 years of guilt is enough." Then John's voice changed one more time, becoming Aram's. "Thank you. Thank you to all who heard me. I finally go to the light." At that moment, every piece of electronic equipment in the operating room flickered simultaneously. The lights dimmed for just a second, and I felt a strange sensation, like a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying was suddenly lifted. Dr. Vasquez completed the surgery successfully. John's brain showed no signs of the scarring that had been causing his symptoms. His recovery was remarkably smooth. When John woke from anesthesia, he was different. The confusion and memory problems that had plagued him since his accident were gone. The vivid dreams about ancient crimes had stopped. "I feel like myself again," he told me the next day. "For months, I felt like I was carrying someone else's burden. But now I just feel like John Morrison." 3 days after surgery, hospital maintenance made a remarkable discovery during routine basement inspections. In a section corresponding to the area beneath Operating Room 3, they found an old stone foundation incorporated into the hospital's structure. Under that stone, exactly as Aram had described, they found human remains wrapped in deteriorated blue cloth, along with ancient coins and jewelry that archaeologists later confirmed were 6th century Byzantine artifacts. The remains were respectfully relocated to a proper cemetery, with a memorial acknowledging both Matthias of Cappadocia and Aram ben David. John Morrison made a complete recovery. His neurological symptoms disappeared and he returned to work 3 months later. But he was changed by the experience. "I feel like I was chosen for this," he told me during his final follow-up appointment. "Like my accident, my surgeries, everything that happened. It was all meant to help 2 souls find peace after 15 centuries of suffering." This experience changed how I practice medicine and how I understand the connections between past and present, living and dead, guilt and forgiveness. That was 6 months ago. John Morrison returned to his life as a construction worker, but he carries the knowledge that he helped resolve a spiritual crisis that had lasted 15 centuries. For me, the experience fundamentally changed how I approach my work as a surgical nurse. I've learned that the operating room isn't just a place for healing bodies, sometimes it's a place for healing souls. Since John's case, I've started paying attention to other patients who seem to carry burdens beyond their medical conditions. Patients who speak of dreams that feel like memories. Patients who seem to be struggling with guilt or unfinished business that doesn't match their personal histories. I've discovered that St. Catherine's Hospital, built on ancient burial grounds, seems to be a place where the boundaries between past and present are thin. Other staff members have reported unusual experiences, voices in empty rooms, equipment malfunctioning in specific patterns, patients who seem to know things they shouldn't know. But instead of being frightened by these phenomena, I've learned to see them as opportunities for healing that transcends the physical. 3 months after John's final surgery, a patient named Maria Santos was brought to us after a car accident. During her surgery, she began speaking in what sounded like Spanish, but it was an archaic dialect that predated modern Spanish by centuries. Using what I'd learned from John's case, I contacted linguistic experts and discovered Maria was speaking as someone named Isabella de Montoya, a Spanish colonist who had died in the 1600s, with deep regret about her treatment of indigenous people. With the help of a historian and a priest, we were able to facilitate a similar resolution. Isabella, speaking through Maria, was able to acknowledge her wrongs and ask for forgiveness. Maria's recovery was remarkable, and like John, she felt she'd been chosen for this purpose. Dr. Vasquez and I have quietly developed what we call spiritual protocols for cases that seem to involve more than medical issues. We've learned to recognize the signs: patients who speak languages they've never learned, who know historical details they couldn't possibly know, who seem to carry emotional burdens that don't match their personal experiences. The hospital administration has been surprisingly supportive. After John's case made the medical journals, carefully written to focus on the neurological aspects rather than the spiritual ones, St. Catherine's has become known for our innovative approach to consciousness during surgery. But I know what really happens in operating room 3. I know that some healing requires more than medical intervention. John Morrison taught me that the dead sometimes need the living to speak for them. That guilt can transcend death. That forgiveness is powerful enough to free souls that have been trapped for centuries. I've learned that hospitals, especially those built on historical sites, can become bridges between worlds. Places where the past and present intersect, where ancient wrongs can finally be made right. The medical community is beginning to recognize that consciousness is more complex than we previously understood. That the boundary between life and death isn't as clear as our textbooks suggest. That healing sometimes involves addressing spiritual wounds that are centuries old. Every day when I walk into St. Catherine's Hospital, I remember that I'm not just a surgical nurse. I'm someone who helps facilitate healing on multiple levels: physical, emotional, and spiritual. I've learned to listen not just to what patients say when they're conscious, but to what they might be trying to communicate when they're under anesthesia. Because sometimes the most important conversations happen when the conscious mind is quiet. John Morrison is doing well. He and Sarah had another child last year, a son they named David, after the merchant whose descendants helped him find peace. John says he chose the name to honor the connection that allowed healing to happen across 15 centuries. Aram ben David and Matthias of Cappadocia finally found peace. Their story, which began with betrayal and murder in 6th century Antioch, ended with forgiveness and resolution in a modern Chicago operating room. But their story also taught me something profound about the nature of healing itself. Sometimes healing doesn't just happen in the present moment. Sometimes it reaches backward through time to address wounds that have been festering for centuries. Sometimes the living serve as vessels for the dead to finally find peace. And sometimes the most important surgery we perform isn't on a patient's brain or body, it's on the collective soul of humanity itself. I still work night shifts at St. Catherine's Hospital. I still assist Dr. Vasquez in complex neurosurgeries. I still monitor brain activity and ensure patient safety during the most delicate procedures. But now I understand that my role extends beyond medical care. I'm part of a healing process that encompasses not just individual patients, but the spiritual health of our entire community. Every time I enter operating room 3, I remember John Morrison and the ancient merchant who spoke through him. I remember that some connections transcend death, that some stories need to be told across centuries, and that healing comes in forms we're only beginning to understand. The next time you're in a hospital, especially an older one with a long history, remember John's story. Remember that the buildings we construct for healing sometimes become repositories for older needs, deeper wounds, spiritual injuries that require more than medical intervention. Listen to the patients who seem to carry burdens too heavy for their personal histories. Pay attention to the words spoken in unconscious moments. Be open to the possibility that healing sometimes requires acknowledging truths that stretch back through centuries. Because sometimes the dead need our help to finally rest in peace. And sometimes helping them find that peace is the most important healing we can provide. Thank you for listening to John's story. Thank you for being open to the idea that consciousness, guilt, forgiveness, and healing are more complex and wonderful than we ever imagined. Next time you see a surgical nurse, Remember that we do more than monitor equipment and assist doctors. Sometimes we serve as bridges between worlds, helping ancient souls find the peace they've been seeking for centuries. In the end, that might be the most sacred work of all.